Hello, today I'm going to be painting this cave mountain scene in Procreate using my iPad, and I'm going to explain all my settings and tools and brushes, etc., and how I went about it. So let's get started. Okay, first of all, I'm going to create a new canvas using the screen size of my iPad. It's an iPad 13, so any landscape size should do. Then I'm looking for a sky color. Any blue will do. We can change it later, so don't worry too much about it. I'll stick the colors on as I go, but I'd rather you just make it up, but feel free to copy the colors which I show. So I'm using the flat brush from the painting section, and I'm using a fairly big brush, and I'm going to block in the outer edges first. Now I do have a reference in the background, but I'm not trying to copy it exactly. I just want the rough elements and the rough shape of things. The reference for me is just a guide and not something I need to copy exactly. But it's good to get the important parts in, like I'm painting the ledge there. Without these, the highlights won't work exactly. So get a rough shape. And what's nice about this painting, this composition, is the cave that you're standing in is going to frame the painting. So I created a new layer for the mountains underneath the cave, and I'm looking for a bluish color, so you'll see me try out a few. Again, I'll pop the one I end up with, or the rough one of them, because once I paint all the mountains there'll be various blues in them. But I'll give you one of the codes so you can get started with something. You'll notice I held the pen down too long there and I get a shape, but if you just let it go, it'll kind of go back. So again, don't worry too much about the exact shape. These mountains, and accidentally color filled there. So I make a big shape around. You can't actually see it, so the color fill works. Or you could just use the brush to brush it in. Whatever works. There's one important thing here, is to make sure that the mountains are fairly square, because this landscape has kind of sharp edges everywhere. And it hasn't rounded off in very many places, so add some of these squares, and if you forget you can add them later at the end anyway, so it's not such a big deal. All we're looking for now is the rough composition, so that being the mountains and the sky fill about half and half of this. And on a new layer I'm put in some foreground mountains stroke foreground. It's not really a hill, it's not really mountains, it's just something. But the only thing you want to do is make sure that that blue is just darker than the blue behind, and again stick it on a different layer. So into the sky, I have a new layer above the sky, and I paint in some yellow lightly and blend it in a little bit, and then I'll use adjustments Gaussian blur to blend it in with the sky. So once you have that, we can create a new layer again and turn clip and mask on that layer. And what that does, it means it won't go outside of the pixels. So when you grab your brush, and so I'll do it in a second, you want to find, I'm actually on the wrong layer here, so I'm going to undo this. And so one thing I do is tap the layer on and off so you can make sure you're on the right one. So again, I'm on the right layer now, I found the right one, and I picked out blue and then I go lighter. What we're trying to do, and you'll see me test it a couple of times, so what we're trying to do is push these far mountains into the background, and we do that by making a lighter blue. Now we want 3 levels of these, so I have 1 level there now. Well, I have 2 levels, but we're gonna add another one. So I'll color pick that one again and go lighter, but not quite as light as the background mountains. So what we'll have then is like 3 layers of mountains. Now I don't mean actual layers in Procreate, I mean distance wise we have layers. So we'll have 3 layers there, and you want to make sure that when you're painting on these layers that you're kind of gentle, so it makes more interest. So we're putting in a little river here, Well, it could be a big river because this distance is so far, you can't really tell. But make sure it kind of just zigzags your way, and make sure it's not too bright. Otherwise, it'll make too much attention away from the sky, etc. So it will reflect a bit, so it's okay if you have a few highlights there, but don't go crazy. And make sure it's small because it's so far away. If it was really big, you'd have a problem. So now we've got these basic mountains in. We're looking for a highlight color. Now, one highlight color works quite well, and in this landscape is like an orangey color. I'll stick a color code on screen and you can copy that. But basically any orangey color will do. So on a new layer, again, you want to put the highlights on the new layer with clip and mask turned on so it sticks to the blue underneath. And with varying pressure, with a fairly big brush, it's important that it's a big brush. You'll see that sometimes it's quite bright and then sometimes it's quite dim. Now you want to vary that because it just means that it's hitting different surfaces and it's adding some detail as you go. Now you want to fill most of it, but like I said, with varying degrees of pressure. And as you go back, you'll want to use less pressure again, and you might want to shift the color a bit. That's not so important, but what is important is the pressure gets less. So these highlights are not so strong at the back. Now, as you go really far back, the color might be too dark, and here it is too dark. So grab that color and push it up to the left a little bit. And I'm still using varying degrees of pressure here and there, and that means the sun's catching something brighter, and you'll kind of get these easy details without really trying too hard. Again, I got a reference that I'm looking at, but I'm not looking at it to copy this kind of detail. It's too small. So really what I'm trying to do is just suggest that there's lots of complexity in these mountains, and you do that just by varying the size of the brush and how light or dark it is. And so I'm not copying any of that in the reference. I just know where the sun's coming from, which is top right, and where the highlight should be, and then I'll just suggest it. So over on the other side of the mountain, it's all in shadow, but it's very important to have a lot of detail because you don't want really big flat parts of the landscape, because that doesn't happen. There's always detail, no matter how dark or light it is. So I'm doing exactly the same. It might look a bit different, but I'm doing exactly the same on the same layer that I had for the highlights. I'm doing exactly the same, varying different parts of pressure, different sizes as I go, and I'm just using a darker blue than the underneath. So color pick that blue and darken it a little bit. There's no point me showing you the color code there because it needs to go from, in most colors, if not all colors, need to be relative to other colors. So the simple trick is to color pick and then shift it. And you usually shift in lighter or darker. And try and keep it simple there. And if your colors don't look the same, don't worry about it. It really doesn't matter, as long as the dark or light is correct. So I've got a basic mountain scene there now. So I'm going to create another layer somewhere. So I've decided to go back, to the foreground one. So complete that a little bit. So I'm looking for the layers. I always lose my layers. And I've realized it's too light. So I go to hue, saturation, and brightness and drop it down just a few %. Now, depending on which colors you use, you might be okay and you might not need to do that. So I create a new layer and use clip and mask again. So you can use that pretty much everywhere. So if I go a bit too fast and you want to put something over something else, just create a layer and turn clip and mask on. And you'll see that you can't paint out of it, which is just a nice trick. So I'll do that everywhere. So if I skip over that, just assume I've done it and do it yourself. Now, this is a bit closer to you. So you'll notice I bunch the highlights together, again with varying degrees, but I'll hold it down and make bigger shapes. And I've decided to push that river over this foreground too. And that's kind of optional. You didn't need to, because maybe it didn't go that way. And so it wouldn't be a mistake if you didn't. But I've just color picked again. I use color pick a lot. And so once you have a bunch of colors in your painting, you want to color pick as much as possible, because it'll make all the colors harmonize better, and the whole painting can come together. If you try not to choose colors too much when you have loads. So I'm gonna work on the cave section now, and I've done the same again. I got a new layer with clipping mask over the big browny blobby bit, and you'll see I test that now and again to see I got clipping mask on, and then just undo so I know I'm in the right place. Now I'm working out where the sun's coming from again. It's the top right. Obviously it's not going to hit everything in the cave, because the cave is going to be mostly in shadow, and whatever sun gets through is only going to hit certain bits. So using a big brush, you want to hit where the sun is getting through. Now this is where the reference becomes very important, because it's very difficult to work out where the sun comes through, and because that's dependent on a lot of factors, and sometimes those factors you can't even see in your reference painting or photo or whatever anyway, so it's sometimes practically impossible to work that out. So I am using the reference to know where the sun hits this cave. Now you want some really big contrast with these, so the highlight should be massively different than the color below. And you can see I'm using hue, saturation, brightness. Now use that if your dark colors, just any color, basically any layer looks a bit funny, and just tweak it until you like it. It doesn't have to match my colors, just tweak it until you like the color, and play around and make sure you like the combinations. It's more about the combination than the actual color. So I'm trying to find a purple color here. It's taken me a little bit of time, but sometimes, not all the time, when you have shadows, they kind of go blue or purple, and I decided to use a purple here. Blue probably would have been fine too, and I'm trying to experiment a little bit here of trying to get the right color. Again, there's no actual such thing as the right or wrong color. So I've put a purple in there to suggest that it's a cool shadow, and I'll rework on that now. So don't forget, everything looks kind of weird at this point. This painting took me about 30 minutes, so it's going to look fairly weird until at least halfway. So up in the cave section, which is all rock, these colors are kind of tricky to find, and you'll see me swapping a bunch of times between blues and reds, and with this brush, because when you press lightly, it'll give you a lighter version, well, slightly less opacity version than whatever you're picking. When you experiment, you'll get different colors, and then I'll use those to color pick. So I've settled on a dark reddish color, and you can see I just, with a big brush again, I always start big brush, go smaller brushes, and we're trying to just get some simple details in first. Now what's nice about these caves is they're like really reflective, and they have this orangey red kind of reflection in them. I guess they're shiny, these rocks, and so I'm trying to suggest that, and as you can see, it's quite messy at the moment. The detail will come later. It's easier to add the detail once you've kind of got a bunch of colors in there and variation, so it doesn't look all the same color. So again, I'm not really copying the reference here. The sun doesn't really hit this rock section. It's reflecting the bottom, I think, and the sun. These caves and this kind of rock is really weird. It's highly reflective. And basically what I'm trying to do is represent that these rock faces are reflecting the sun, which comes from somewhere. I don't even know, to be honest. And then right on the tips of some of these rocks, the sun actually gets through and is really powerful on these. So to make powerful sun, all you really got to do is make sure there's a high contrast between the part that the sun is hitting and the part that it isn't hitting, and you want that to be fairly sharp. So you can see, like where I am now, that the difference between the left side and the right side is very big. And so I'm starting to add the detail now. So I've got 3 brushes. I think it's 16%, 5%, and 3% or something like that. But don't worry about that. Just you can see the notches on my left side brush panel there. So you want some 3 like that. I generally use the same 3 size brushes, so I've put them to presets. But you don't really need to do that. So I'm going back down to the ledge section and tidying things up. And basically what I'm doing here is color picking, adding some details, swapping between my medium and small brush, and starting to sculpt what it should look like. And again, I'm not using the reference that much here. I'm just trying to make it so there's detail, enough detail, because this is really close to the viewer. You're going to need quite a lot of detail, and that's kind of up to you. You could do a lot more detail. You could add a lot more rocks and a lot more cracks and all that kind of stuff up front. I prefer to keep it relatively simple, but you could add more. But again, this is on another layer, again with clip and mask. I probably didn't say that, but you don't need to worry too much about that. The only reason you'll want it on a different layer, pretty much the only reason you need it on another layer, is if you want to change the colors or the, how bright or dark it is. And I will do that quite a lot. So, but if you make a mistake, don't worry too much about it. You can still recover that. So again, so I'm doing something a little bit different here now. So on my layer above the basic flats, so I got basic flats for everything. An easy way to add detail is to go onto your highlight area, which remember you did with a big flat brush, so it's all nice and basic. Is on the top layer, take a small brush and an eraser and remove some of the highlights, so you'll get lots of like little cracks and details without really painting them. You're removing them. So for some reason it seems easier to do that than to paint them. I'm not entirely sure why they call it negative painting, and it's a kind of a psychological thing that we seem to be able to remove shapes better than adding them. So try that out. It can take a bit of getting used to, but it definitely works, and I'm going to use that quite a lot, and especially on the rocks above, and it will add lots of detail. Now for some reason, if you try to paint those details, it doesn't go as easy. Again, not sure why, but try to use the eraser. So once you have the new layer, you have clip and mask on that, put the highlights in quite blocky, using various degrees of pressure. I'm doing it again right now. Is I'm darkening the right side ledge because it doesn't get so much light, only fairly subtly. And then with this highlight layer, use the eraser tool, and we can add a lot of detail. This is going to be very obvious when I get to the up top section of the rocks. Again, I mentioned earlier that when you have a dark big flat dark point on the painting, make sure that it still has detail. Now this detail doesn't have to, and it should be fairly basic and not have too much detail in it, because it obviously is dark and you wouldn't see too much detail, but it's very important that you have some. Now hopefully you see I'm talking about the blue right big square section there. I'm hoping I break that up, otherwise it's a mistake. Because you can see now there's not that many flat layers. Okay, other than kind of the sky, that's okay. But so this is what I was talking about with adding detail to the highlight section. You can see me messing around with the layers there, and I've decided that the blocky section underneath, the one I did right at the start, was not dark enough. So I did the hue, saturation, brightness, and darkened it. Now I needed to darken it because, as you see now, on my highlight layer, I've taken a small brush on the eraser side, don't forget the eraser tool, and made it small. And now I'm adding all that detail I'm talking about by removing the highlights. Like I said, for some reason that's easier than adding detail with a brush. and you can see I'm kind of messy. The only thing I'm trying to do is vary where they go, how big they are, but I'm very careful about which direction they go. And you can see I'm angling my brush to make sure that they kind of follow where the rocks are pointing. Now you know where they're pointing because I've already done the highlights in such a way that they're pointing. Now you can see I'm kind of doing a circle, so they're all pointing towards the middle. That is on purpose because all the rocks were pointing in that direction. Now you wouldn't want to do like horizontal erasing here, and you can see I've changed complete different angle there because the rock is pointing upwards. So keep in mind that detail and shadows and highlights have a very important direction, and it's usually towards the sun. But sometimes, like these caves, the highlight is not so obvious because it's a reflective one. So be careful about where these surfaces point towards. And I know that sounds a bit complicated, but basically just try to be consistent about the direction of your highlights and shadows. So you can see now you got a load of detail there with me basically scribbling out loads of highlights. And you couldn't really do that the other way around because you'd have to change color constantly, and because the colors are already there and they're already nice and complicated, removing them keeps all that complexity and loses just some of the highlights. So it shows like there's a crack and there's a divot and there's a hole and that kind of stuff, but I didn't actually paint them. You kind of get them for free, if that makes sense. So, I mean, the rock side's looking pretty good now, so I need to mess around with the ledge again. So I'm changing the hue, saturation, brightness again, and I do that quite a lot to kind of get some nice colors going on. And I realized these purple shadows were a bit too purple, so what I said earlier, what I'm doing here is I'm taking the colors from the above, which I think work quite well, and I'm putting them down into the bottom. So I'll color pick some and literally stick them down the bottom. But one thing you want to be careful of is I'm not pressing very hard here, so you can see it's basically glazing the bottom rather than color all over it. Now if you did that, it'd probably be a bit too powerful. So you don't want to do that. So be careful about color picking and moving it somewhere else. So one thing I'm doing here is curves. In the adjustment layer, I've decided that my bottom is not bright enough. So use that adjustment, curves, and moving those. You got two little dots. You got the left dot, and you can move it all over the place. You got the top right dot. You can move her everywhere. What I say is keep it on the level the dot already is, and just move them left and right. And keep it fairly simple. If you move the bottom left one right, I think it gets darker, and the top right one you move left gets brighter, something like that. So basically it's changing the contrast of your painting with a bit more control. So there's no exact numbers I can tell you there. Just play around with them if you want to boost your brightness and shadows. And just experiment with that tool. It can be quite weird, and if you go too far, it'll just go absolutely crazy. So just keep subtle little movements, and you'll get some nice adjustments out of that. I don't use it very often, but it's quite useful if your painting starts to look a bit dull. And it will look dull after a while, because if you paint with a brush like this, which has varying opacity, eventually when you put things on top of other things, colors on top of other colors, they'll kind of get muddy, and there's not a huge amount you can do about that. It's just the more you paint on top of other colors, that will happen, and it's quite hard to avoid. So using the tool like the curves is going to help that considerably. So if it looks muddy, try and use curves. Okay, so I was just doing little details there. So one important thing here is I'm picking that big brown blob layer that I did pretty much my first thing, and I'm chopping out sections. So it was way too neat. So you could either have done that at the start and being very careful, or you can do it now and with all the detail already in there, I think it's a bit easier to see what you're doing. If you shaped it very early, I don't think you would know exactly how to shape it. So I do the shaping now, and I think it's a bit more obvious where to put the little kinks and things. So it just makes it look a bit more realistic, because obviously the rocks are sharp in places, and actually they're quite sharp in this painting everywhere. And so it's okay to have some curves. You want some variation, but there's lots of chips and things like that. So, and the top one especially is important because it's massively contrast with the sky. And you wouldn't want a big curve there, or too many, because it would look a bit strange. But a nice variation is always good. So some curves, some divots, and make sure you don't make any patterns. We're quite good at making like one divot, and then we'll make another one, and it'll be exactly the same. So be careful with that. So I'm adding in some vegetation now, and this is kind of optional, but it adds a nice little variation to the color. So I've picked a dark green, and you want to be really careful with vegetation. It is considerably darker than what you kind of expect. Many times I've used way too light colors, and this one in particular I'm doing. Again, all this vegetation's on a new layer. This one is in shadow, so be careful to make it very dark. And it will also affect the stone underneath, which hopefully I will. Again, color pick. Don't pick a new color. You have loads and loads of colors in your painting now, so use them. And so I dropped the shadow underneath that little the big brush thing on the left, and we're good to go. So I put some highlights. Actually, you'll notice, and many times, maybe you do this yourself too, you'll see me messing around here, undoing, redoing. Basically, I've put the vegetation on the wrong layer, and I'm trying to undo and trying to get my shadow back in and trying to put it on the right layer again. Now, sometimes I just leave it, but in this case, maybe I want to delete the vegetation. Maybe it doesn't work. So I'm careful to undo there and put them back on the right layer. So maybe my vegetation, my bushes are too dark or light, and if they're not on the same layer, I'm gonna have troubles later. But if I do it on the wrong layer for ages, I'll probably just leave it and try not to stress about it. It's not gonna be a big deal. So if you're on the wrong layer for ages, don't worry about it, just leave it. And so I'm putting some highlights on the vegetation. So again, all I really do is pick the base color, and then I will lighten it a little bit. Now be careful not to go too light with vegetation, and make sure you only have highlights where the sun is hitting it. You know where that is because the ground underneath it will be bright, and it's okay to stick another couple somewhere else, but just be kind of wary of over highlighting. I've made that mistake myself many times. So I'm slowing down now towards the end of the painting. I always slow down because I'm looking around the painting, and I kind of got a checklist in my head. Have I got everything? So one thing here is I'm using the select tool, freehand color fill, and on a new layer I'm making a big shape to mimic the sky, and I'm using that sky color. I've picked the sky color so you can see it's blending in, and then we go to the adjustments, we go to Gaussian blur, and we blur out quite a lot, and because we're trying to create a mist effect where the mountain is blending in with the sky, so it pushes it further back. So I've gone for about 50%, but check whatever works for you. And then on that layer, you click the N button and you drag down the opacity. So I've gone for 62%, but that's not an exact number, and it will overlap a few things here. So I'm using the eraser. I'm bringing back things that I don't want it to overlap. So basically anything is supposed to be in the distance, right? So this big mountain, it wouldn't really penetrate that. So I've erased it to make sure it doesn't affect that mountain. And you can see on and off, it adds just a nice little effect and pushes it down. And then I'll drag it down and try and find where to put it. So I'm getting quite a few layers now, so it's quite hard to see where to put it. But I'm trying to put it above the correct mountain, and I think I'll get it eventually. And make sure clip and mask is off when you're doing effects. And so I'm just trying to see what kind of layer system I got going on now. And then I'll start merging them. So I'll merge them into just a few layers, and you'll see why in a second. So I'm just experimenting with layers to see what I want to keep separate. Now, generally, you just want like areas of colors that are roughly the same joined together. So the sky can be one, the whole background mountain can be one, and I'll keep the stone separate from the platform and the vegetation separate. Now I do that so I can adjust them now, and I'll do that in a second. I'm just looking at it, trying to understand, is it bright enough, is it dark enough, and etc. So I think the mountain is too saturated, so hue, saturation, brightness, and I think it's a little bit too dark. So I'll play around with these, usually to the extremes, to see, like, if I push it this far, does it work if I push it this far? And then I'll bring it back. So my background, I think, is a little bit too dark, I said. So I brighten it by 4%. And then I'll undo and have a look. And it's like, is that better or worse? You know, kind of like you're having an eye test. Now, depending on how you've painted it, you might have to darken it or brighten it or saturate it. So just play around with these. Just keep in mind not to push it too far. So then I'll undo it and redo it. And then it's not a massive change. And you might even think it was better or worse before, actually, anyway. So these little subtle changes don't make a huge difference. And so basically now for the next few minutes, I'll go around and I'll tidy up some scribbles using kind of big brushes. I'll add little highlights here and there. You can see I leave quite a lot of scribbles. This painting took me 30 minutes. Now, if you really wanted to tidy everything up, that might actually be another 30 minutes. And these are kind of more like sketch paintings, and they're not really, you know, they're not really for anything other than just for fun and show the video and for learning purposes. So you can get away with these scribbles. I mean, if you were trying to sell this or it was a commission or something, you probably want to tidy up those scribbles. Or even if it's just you don't like them and you don't want to leave them there, then that's fine. Go around and tidy these scribbles up. But I would say not to leave those, not to do that too early, because you want your painting loose. And if you start tidying up scribbles early, I think your painting might turn out a bit stiff. So I would say it's fine to, you know, fix all these scribbles now, but you certainly wouldn't want to watch me fix these scribbles for 30 minutes, because it's just going to be the same process. It's going to be go on the right layer, choose an appropriate brush size, which means you can't have it too big because it will take away all your detail, and you don't want it too small because it'll add detail. So you kind of just want to, it depends on how big the scribbles are, for example, and you want to be careful not to remove what's underneath when you tidy these scribbles up, because you're going to lose all that interest that you've made early on. So you can see some scribbles on the left here, so you'll want to, you know, color pick and tidy them up. So I'm back here in the mountain. It's easier now that I've only got a few layers. So what I'm doing is adding a bit more detail to these mountains at the back. Now again, all I'm really doing is color picking the shade underneath and scribbling out some of the details. So it's a little bit like the erasing, but with a brush instead. Now you can only do the erasing trick once you've got them all separated on layers. So that's why I keep them separate early on. But I like to merge them later because it just simplifies which layers you need to be on. And at this point, the painting is near completion, so I don't need all these layers to, you know, worry about So I've only got like 6 in the end, which is great, I think. But you don't have to merge those layers, to be honest, if you don't want to adjust them. Or you can adjust them individually. So merging them all together is completely optional. If you like to keep them separate, then keep them separate. And if you like to use more, then use more. Use how many you need. So I'm just coming up with the final details here. And nothing significant is going to change. A few highlights here and there, but I'm basically done. So if you like that, give me a like and a sub, and let me know if it was useful, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.